let's dive into what Pinpoint what version 2 offers to you. One of the things we've been keynoting early in the release cycle of 2.0 is a feature called Pinpoint. This is an attempt at, again, bringing the semantic technology that everybody knows they want out in a form where it's easily used. Pinpoint rescores topics based upon something we refer to as engagement. The question we're trying to answer is, what is this text truly about? Just because I mentioned something a number of times doesn't really mean it might be the focus. But in trying to decompose what it is that leads us as humans to decide that something is more important than another and related to the signals that we produce, we reach some pretty strong conclusions that things about which people express sentiment or things where they express some intent to do something or start offering guidance about it or requesting guidance about it, these tend to be the topics with which they are the most engaged. Therefore, the Pinpoint algorithm scores on the combination of all of these signals to bring out the most truly relevant topic, or a better keyword in effect, since it brings in all these things together. This makes it very easy to implement for keyword-based applications. It's not the only value of it, of course, and one thing I should mention is that Pinpoint and anything like it still delivers all the same information as part of the XML output that you've always seen. So Pinpoint can get you there faster in certain ways, but all that supporting information to dive deeper is still available to you. Pinpoint is the first so-called super signal. Sometimes internally we call them super PVs. And these are things that combine other signals into new ones. Increasingly over time, you'll see us doing more and more of that. In a way, it's kind of a mashup. Next set of things I'd like to speak to you about are a number of new text-level signals that you may recognize from having been part of the topic and actions analyses already, but we've now broadened them to use them at the level of the full text. This is an implementation aid that was especially put together for social media. A good example of the types of things you might see from a tweet or from Facebook might be something like this one. That's awesome. I think we should definitely do it now. The problem is, although there's a definite sentiment, there's no topic. And it's definitely offering some kind of guidance, but about what? It has some intention, no specific action. It has a certain temporality now, but it's not related to anything in particular. That doesn't mean that it's not a very, very useful piece of text to be able to analyze. If nothing else, it raises a flag. It says that something's going on here. Maybe it needs a further look. You may want, under the circumstances, then to take a look at the entire thread of the conversation. But if all you have at your disposal is a snippet like the one we saw, now instead of just getting a blank topic analysis and very little useful information, you'll now get these signals at the text level for the particular type of text. We'd also like to mention that there's a brand new signal in version 2 called contrast. This is also part of the styles analysis, as were the other text level things we just described. This was a specific response to folks in the moderation and law enforcement area, as well as some others, who wanted us to try to detect how much disagreement was in there. Actually, the way it was expressed to us was controversy. We've come to understand that controversy is actually a pretty complex type of thing to measure. So as a precursor to it, we got our arms around disagreement, which we've called contrast in this particular case. And it will tell you whether or not over the entire text there's no disagreement being expressed, or some, or lots. And some of the uses might be finding hot spots where debate is taking place, or raising flags when people are starting to flame each other or things are spinning out of control, particularly useful for moderation, or again, for law enforcement. That's where that specific request would come to. And also it permits intervention in conversations, brand conversations, or in social media and forums, places where you may want to get in and intervene, take conversation in a more constructive direction. Now let's move on to something that's very, very important here. In a lot of ways, this precursor feature called named entity recognition is a real cornerstone for what you're going to be seeing in the future from us. Named entity recognition, or NER, is the first step in something much bigger called Coreference, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides from now. But NER, as we have now released it, does its best to identify persons, organizations, and locations. It'll also try to identify a subtype. So if it's a person, it'll try to tell you that person's gender. If it's an organization, it'll try to differentiate, for example, between a political organization or an educational organization or a commercial company. In the case of locations, it'll try to discern the difference between a state and a city. These are the starting points that we've brought out in this version of NER. And our first view of it says it's pretty good. We think it's going to get a lot better. In cases like NER, you always to some degree want to be employing very, very good lists. And so if you folks see something that you feel should have been identified as a named entity, like Foo Fighters or something that we just didn't happen to spot, let us know so that we can add it to those resource lists and improve the accuracy for everybody. As you can see over on the right from that example, I actually put Johnny Rotten in there. The first name Johnny came back as a person of subtype male. This is the type of output that NER will now deliver to you. But as I noted, we really released this. This is something that's been part of our infrastructure for some time. But the reason we decided to release it as a feature is that it's the first step in something much bigger. And let's start talking now about things that are going to be happening in the future with OpenAmplify. After NER, we're going to start addressing something called coreference. Coreference is kind of one of the holy grails in natural language processing. It's an attempt to be able to connect sentences and references more meaningfully. So, for example, being able to connect he said to a prior male named entity in an earlier sentence, or allowing the statement Federer is still the best to connect to a prior definition of someone called Roger Federer, or allowing I'm going to buy it to create a topic intention for car, mentioned earlier, and lots of other things that we can do here. So the ability to be able to connect pronouns and first names to full names and all of these references, hence the term coreference, obviously once you do that, all the signals start to become a lot better and a lot more accurate. So it's a huge step forward for us. And we will now aggressively pursue coreference because we have named entity recognition in place. And our strategy for doing it is we're going to go after the high certainty rules first. Because as we're saying here, coreference is hard. It's one of the hardest things to do. But if to the degree that we can get a 70-30 or a 65-35 type of result very quickly and get it out to you, we will do that. That's always been our approach. It will be in this particular case. And we'd love you to get into the discussion of this on the forums. If you're a linguist or just have an interest in this, hop out there on the forums. Let us know that you're interested. We'll include you in the discussions and design of all of this. We want all the good input we can get from as many people as we can. In general, as we go forward, the 2.0 is a foundation release for a lot of other things we're going to do. One of the areas we're going to put a lot of effort is into support for the social media world, where, for example, we'll be handling emoticons and slang with a lot more sophistication. We're trying to do a better job of handling dirty text, things that are misspelled or strange abbreviations, or the difference between with 3 M's and 5 M's. All of these things need to be handled in a way that increases accuracy and recall, and we're going to be working on that. Also, the identification of fans, detractors, influencers, intenders, etc. These are the types of information that especially folks operating in social media find particularly important and useful to know. Those of you who've been down deep in the documentation on 2.0 may see that under the scoring part of the API, some of these things I've just mentioned, fans and detractors, etc., are actually now documented features. But we're not talking about them loudly because we've got a little distance to cover to get them to the level of accuracy we would like them to have. Nonetheless, they're there for you to experiment with and let us know how you work out with those. We're also going to go forward and produce more of these useful constructs that are easy to implement along the lines of pinpoint. Again, the idea being to lower barriers to implementation.